Welcome everybody to the At Home with Theosophy series on the fundamental teachings of the Secret Doctrine.
This is the third class that we've done. The first one was on the
four basic
ideas. The second one was on the three fundamental propositions, and then this one is on the 6 numbered items. And what we'll see here is kind of what seems like a repeat, that she's just repeating what she says. In the first two, you'll see some correspondences or correlations between the other items, laundry lists as they've been called in the other ones. So, but she does add, and we'll see in the first couple quotes, she does add where she does add some new material.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because this, as we are going to see, is summing up that she wrote in the Secret Doctrine. So it's meant to recapitulate what she wrote in the book. And among this recapitulation are the basic principles that we have been looking or studying. So we will see some repetition, but there is another aspect, as Michele says, that she dealt with in the stanzas and that we have not seen yet.
So let me ask this, because I've heard this part called, or the summing up called, the recapitulation, or
Mm-hmm.
Is it named that anywhere?
No. Blavatsky didn't really write these titles or subtitles. Well, summing up, I think it's the name of the section. But then inside the section, she says, let us recapitulate. Or the Secret Doctrine establishes 3 fundamental propositions, and that's how we call them, but you won't necessarily find them as subtitles.
Right, and that's what tends to happen. Either Blavatsky puts a word in there, or somebody else decides to name it that, because I just remember that when I first started doing this, someone told me to start with the recapitulation, and I was like, well, I can't find that in the table of contents. So I just wanted to, you really have to have an open mind. Anything that has to do, anything around the Secret Doctrine or Madame Blavatsky for that matter, you really have to have an open, not just an open mind, but kind of an open thinking mind.
Yeah, an attitude of exploring rather than being spoon-fed.
Right. Okay, here we go. Ready?
Yes, so this is a note by Ianthe Hoskins.
The study of the 3 fundamental propositions, advises Madame Blavatsky, should be followed by that of the numbered items in the summing up at the end of Volume 1, Part 1. It would seem to have been her intention to gather together in a few orderly paragraphs the essential features of the Secret Doctrine presented so far. Arriving at the 6th numbered item, she refuses to confine herself to mere recapitulation and adds a considerable amount of explanatory information about those hierarchies of being through whose agency the universe is worked and guided. Even so, she reverts more than once to the fundamental law of the whole system, the essential oneness of existence. So the essential oneness of existence is something that was, it's the first of the 4 numbered items, or
basic ideas.
The first of the 4 basic ideas. It's the first of the 3 fundamental propositions. So we really see how it just pervades, the oneness pervades everything, even in our studies.
Mm-hmm. So in the stanzas, as I mentioned at the beginning, she talks about hierarchies of beings, especially towards the last stanzas in the first volume, but she doesn't really explain their nature in a more general way. She just explains what they do. So it is here in the summing up where she deals with the nature of these celestial beings in a little more comprehensive way.
But not very specific.
No. There is nothing very specific, because this is like a person, imagine an anthropologist or a biologist trying to teach some kids about all the kingdoms of nature and the different species and the whole tree of evolution. So you give the main characteristics. If you start going into too much detail, you will be able to describe one genus, for example, among the thousands. So
yeah, I just didn't want to get your hopes up, because that's what I thought, that we were going to get into a list of the hierarchies of beings and their jobs and what they look like and where they live, but that's not here. Okay, so third class, 6 numbered items. No claim to infallibility or to perfect correctness in every detail of all that is herein written. This is a smaller font, isn't it? Okay, this is Madame Blavatsky's words, so I'll start over. No claim to infallibility or to perfect correctness in every detail of all that is herein written has ever been put forward. Facts are there, and they can hardly be denied. But owing to the intrinsic difficulties of the subjects treated of and the almost insurmountable limitations of the English tongue, as of all other European languages, to express certain ideas, it is more than probable that the writer has failed to present the explanations in the best and clearest form. So this here again is one of Madame Blavatsky's disclaimers. You know, here she says, I don't claim this to be a revelation. I don't claim this to be perfect. I'm trying to explain it, but you give me the English language to explain it in, and that's far from perfect language to explain spiritual concepts, spiritual ideas in. So, so she says, yeah, you're probably not going to be happy with it because it's not going to be as clear as we would like it, which we can see.
And also, there is in several places this idea that Blavatsky mentions, that this is not divine revelation, this is not to be taken as a sacred scripture, which we human beings have the tendency to do. Even today, some people take everything that is in the Secret Doctrine as a sacred word, and if there is something that is different, then it is wrong. And that is clearly not what Blavatsky intended for this. It is a wonderful text with, infinite dimensions, and we can learn a lot. But again, it is the effort of a person to convey something that is very intricate, and that should be more for our intuition, our meditation, pondering over, than to generate a rigid, dogma on this.
Right. It's just another tool in the path of yoga for, the yoga of theosophy that we're trying here. So it's not a guidebook or like a technical guidebook that tells you step by step. It's more of, here it is, here's the map. Now try and find your way, but within the getting to the destination, it's the journey that's really where you're going to learn everything.
And I don't know how many teachers come from that point of, humility, because normally teachers that generate movements, organizations, they offer what they have as if this is the ultimate truth, and the people who belong to that organization take what they said as the ultimate truth. I think that this is something quite unique in the Theosophical approach.
Okay, here we go. Number 1. The system in question is no fancy of one or several isolated individuals. It is an uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers. How did they do this? By checking, testing, and verifying in every department of nature the traditions of old by the independent visions of great adepts, that is to say, men who have developed and perfected their physical, mental, psychic, and spiritual organizations to the utmost possible degree. No vision of one adept is accepted till it is checked and confirmed by the visions of other adepts and by centuries of experience. So here in this one paragraph, she explains to us what this is, how it came to be, who the adepts are and why this is not a revelation, but it is verified. So it is a truth, and it is verified.
Yes, and this is, I think, part of why Blavatsky placed emphasis on the fact that the Secret Doctrine cannot be taken as a sacred text, because the origin of the teachings that she's trying to convey seems to be quite authoritative. She's saying there are these enlightened beings who have developed the human faculties to, the utmost possibilities, who have a kind of scientific approach to this, and independently they look into the universe and the forces in the universe, not only on the physical plane but also on all the spiritual planes and the entities and the processes, and they verify, they check with each other. What did you see? Or in meditation. So the source is quite authoritative. But Blavatsky is trying to convey this in words. She was not an enlightened being, a full adept, and also trying to share this in words is already a limitation. So I think what she wanted us to keep in mind is that one thing is the source of all this, and that can be, very close to truth. And another thing is what we find written in a book that we shouldn't take as a flawless revelation.
So the book itself, the physical book itself that we have in hand, is not an authoritative revelation or authoritative book. But once we become that perfected man or that adept, then this stuff is based on
our perception is a perception of truth.
Right.
Yeah.
The Secret Doctrine is the accumulated wisdom of the ages, and its cosmogony alone is the most stupendous and elaborate of all systems. But such is the mysterious power of occult symbolism, that the facts which have actually occupied countless generations of initiated seers and prophets to marshal, set down, and explain in the bewildering series of evolutionary progress are all recorded on a few pages of geometrical signs and glyphs. Yeah, go ahead. I thought of a...
So here the idea is that, all these adepts and seers, prophets, however we want to call them, have for generations are learning about the universe on all the different planes and the processes. However, there is something in the universe that all this can be put in very simple symbols, geometrical symbols and glyphs and signs. Not that we will necessarily understand everything that is implied in them. We have a few of those that Blavatsky opens the Secret Doctrine, saying there are some pages of a very old book, and there are some symbols there. The first one is a white circle that represents, the absolute nature. Then there is a dot in the center of the symbol. That is the first cause, the first logos. Then a line. So there are symbols that she says this can summarize the very intricate processes in the universe. But of course, you need to be able to understand the meaning of the symbols.
So that's a lot of how Christianity is also. So Christianity can be read as a book of symbols or analogies or stories, and it tells so much more than just the paragraph or the piece that's written there. Or if you take the sun, the sun can be a symbol for many things, but if you really look at it, if we put the sun on the page and have the backstory may take pages and pages of what the sun is, but we would know that that's what that symbol is.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and many of these symbols are not arbitrary. They are chosen because they do have a correspondence. Like, for example, suppose the heart and the sun may be correlated because they have similar functions. The sun has a similar function from an occult point of view in the solar system as the heart has in a human being. So these are not random symbols. The adepts get to these symbols by knowing the universe and then realizing these are good symbols.
Right. The next one here, the flashing gaze of those seers has penetrated into the very kernel of matter and recorded the soul of things there, where an ordinary profane observer, however learned, would have perceived but the external work of form. But modern science believes not in the soul of things, and hence will reject the whole system of ancient cosmogony. So this is where to me, I see three stages. I see the material world, and we'll throw the scientists in there. Then we have the external world, where we have just the church people, the people who go to church.
The regular religion for...
Right, yeah, regular religion. So they know that there's a little more behind just the materialism. And then we go into the occult world, where the occult world, within just that kernel, as it says, that kernel of matter, there's a whole universe in there.
Yes, and that synthesizes science and religion, because it is researching in a scientific way, but into the spiritual world. So the occult approach, using occult in the sense that Blavatsky used it, and the early Theosophists, is like a synthesis of science and religion, and philosophy too, which is the subtitle of the Secret Doctrine.
And this right here, in this short paragraph here, I saw too a very practical reinforcement of why we meditate, of why we study this type of material, or study the way that we study, and we just don't take concepts in, because the whole idea is to kind of set aside that lower nature, or that lower thinking, and tap into what's higher, so we can see more of what's inside that kernel of matter than what we would if we didn't do these practices. Number 2. The fundamental law in that system, the central point from which all emerges, around and towards which all gravitates, and upon which is hung all its philosophy, is the one homogeneous divine substance principle, the one radical cause. It is called substance principle, for it becomes substance on the plane of the manifested universe as illusion, while it remains a principle in the beginningless and endless, abstract, visible and invisible space. So in this short paragraph here, she kind of messes up all our thinking of what we put in order in those diagrams, or this is what I saw. In those nice diagrams that we showed last week, she throws in a couple different names, but they really make sense here. She explains why it's called a substance, why it's called a principle, and actually if we go a little further, where it becomes matter.
So here the second point in this summary is basically the idea of the unity of life, and it's interesting to see that here she calls it substance principle, in the sense of principle is something more abstract. A principle is something not necessarily material, or in this case it's not even a substance. In philosophy, substance is not only connected to matter, technically speaking. Especially in ancient philosophy, substance was that thing from which other things come, and that thing could be, or from this thing, consciousness or matter or energy come. But normally we use substance more related to matter today. In any case, so this oneness is a very abstract principle in its true nature, and then it manifests as this one element, as the Blavatsky's teachers used to call it, one element or this substance from which the whole diversity comes. But basically it's what we have already discussed. And it says, yeah, homogeneous, as
Right.
it mentions, homogeneous in the sense that there are no parts, there are no differences. From this one thing come consciousness, energy, and matter as we know them, as different differentiations.
It is the omnipresent reality, impersonal, because it contains all and everything. Its impersonality is the fundamental conception of the system. It is latent in every atom in the universe and is the universe in itself.
So this is, important to keep in mind. We are not talking about a being. We are not talking about a God. To say that this reality is impersonal means it does not belong to a person, whether divine or human, or, it's rather it is a principle that we all share in that principle. Therefore, we can all tap into that principle.
As we go through this, we can see that more and more we need to think in the impersonal realm. And I see a couple slides down, we'll see, but we tend to put everything we sense into something that's personal, something that looks or smells or we can conceive like a person. And for me to even think of impersonality, I really can't think of, that's not a concept that comes to my mind, which is probably, it's not even a concept that can come to your mind. It has to come to the formless part.
Yes, and this is part of what the Secret Doctrine is trying to do, to help us reshape our perception. So this is why it is important to pay attention to the words, because if we say this omnipresent reality is impersonal, and we don't pay attention to that, we ignore it, and we think of the absolute as a being, then we are defeating the purpose. We know how to think of the divine as a being, but that is not what the Secret Doctrine is talking about. So we need to pay attention to the words used and make an effort to conceive of these things, as much as we can. As Michele says, concrete thought cannot, understand this. But this will help us get to a more abstract perception. And abstract doesn't mean that is not there. An abstract perception may be very clear and solid, so to say, but it's abstract, it's not personal, as Michele was saying.
So this is the perfect seed for meditation, an omnipresent reality that's impersonal, because when I first read that, I think, okay, well, I'm a person, and if that's impersonal, well, then I really have nothing to do with it. It's far away from me. There's many years of meditation before I can, get to that. But it's not. This is what we are in essence and in concept too. So so it's not that far away.
Yeah, she understood how our minds work.
Right.
Yes, and she specifically talks about this in the notes to Bowen. She says that the Secret Doctrine is a form of jnana yoga. Jnana in Sanskrit means wisdom. That is trying to take us from the concrete to the abstract, to the realm where no idea, neither concrete nor abstract, can hold. Then we are in the formless reality, she says.
And if we follow along with the as above, so below, we can also see that as we, in cosmogenesis, as we're studying about the manifestation of the universe, we're also studying about the manifestation and the workings of the mind. 3. The universe is the periodical manifestation of this unknown absolute essence. It cannot be identified with being of any kind that can be conceived by human intellect. It is best described as neither spirit nor matter, but both.
So here again, there is a little repetition of the nature of the absolute. Again, we tend to have a kind of bias when thinking of the ultimate reality. We think of the ultimate reality as spirit. and then we think that matter is lower. But the ultimate spirit and matter are siblings. It's not father and daughter. They are on the same level. There are different manifestations of spirit and matter, and the absolute is beyond both.
And so just to kind of use the words that we're using today, if we use spirit and substance, they're kind of brother and sister on the same level. And then if we come down and hit those siblings, then we have consciousness and matter. Mm-hmm. So just to, if that helps, that I read that in some notes I had taken before, and mm-hmm. that was very helpful to me for this one slide. So yeah, so here she's saying that the absolute is this one thing. It's not mm-hmm. two things, two parts that make one. It's one thing mm-hmm. from which everything else emanates.
And there is also the reference to the law of cycles, because the universe is the periodical manifestation, she says.
So everything emanates and goes back to this absolute essence. Okay, number 4. The universe with everything in it is called Maya because all is temporary therein, from the ephemeral life of a firefly to that of the sun, compared to the eternal immutability of the one and the changelessness of that principle. The universe with its evanescent, ever-changing forms must be necessarily, in the mind of a philosopher, no better than a will-o-wisp, yet the universe is real enough to the conscious beings in it, which are as unreal as itself. So just a side note, the will-o-wisp is a luminescent thing in the swamps that they think come from methane, but they've taken pictures of it. So, it's there, but it's not there.
Mm-hmm. So this point says that everything in the universe, in the manifested universe, is Maya, which means illusion. Maya is a Sanskrit term that means illusion. Now, that illusion doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Right, because it just means that it's not a reality according to the absolute. From the absolute, it's an illusion, it's an illusion because it's temporary. But here on this physical plane, this is all real. This is all a reality to me from this level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, we say if something happens that is not really relevant from a higher point of view, let's say when a kid may be upset because of something that is not really relevant from the point of view of an adult, then we would say, well, that's an illusion. It's something that doesn't matter. But for the kid, that's the reality. It's just like, teenagers, for them it's very important what brand of pants you are wearing. Now, from an adult in a completely different environment, you say, what does it matter
from the adult who's paying for it?
What does it matter that the label is there or not? So you can see that is an illusion, that these pants will make you more popular or something. But within the environment of the teenager, that is how it works. Even if it is crazy, it is something that somebody said this is more popular, and then everybody accepts it. So from a more objective point of view, that is an illusion. But in that environment, it is a reality.
No, I was just going to add, and in that environment, in a teenager's point of view, there is nothing you're going to be able to say from an objective point to say that that's not a reality. So that takes a lot, or it takes a mature teenager to say, no, you're right, to step back and say that no, brands don't matter. So the same thing, it takes a lot for us to say, no, none of this is real. None of this, it is an illusion. It is temporary, and it doesn't matter. Although when the thick of it, it does matter.
Yeah, but it's just as you said, for the teenager to recognize that, he or she has to rise himself beyond that point of view.
Right.
So
Right.
same for us. In order to realize the deeper realities, we need to raise our consciousness and look at things from another perspective. Only then we can recognize that this is that certain things are an illusion. The problem is that living within the illusion is a source of suffering. So why we want to do this? Because we suffer within this illusion, and therefore, as long as I am at this level, then I am at the same level of reality as the illusion. If I can rise beyond that, then I will perceive things differently.
And Deborah adds, she heard that Maya indirectly referred to as the imagination of that which was not. So beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ed adds, it is an illusion and it matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as we are going to see later in other classes, there is a reason why this illusion is projected, at least from the theosophical point of view, and as long as that illusion is necessary, it's part of what we have to experience. But at the same time, we don't want to stay in the illusion more than necessary.
5. Everything in the universe, throughout all its kingdoms, is conscious, that is, endowed with a consciousness of its own kind and on its own plane of perception. We must remember that simply because we do not perceive any signs which we can recognize of consciousness, say in stones, we have no right to say that no consciousness exists there. The occult philosophy never stops at surface appearances, and for it, the essences have more reality than their objective counterparts. It is the universals that are the realities, and the particulars which exist only in name and human fancy. And this, once again, is where we tend to, as a whole, we tend to put personality in things. We tend to look at the surface appearance of things, and if that doesn't fit what we have in our concrete mind, then it just doesn't make sense to us. And I thought about this, consciousness is in everything, but it's not the consciousness that we think. We want to endow rocks with little smiley faces and eyes, and that they, think and they can see us, and they, have a feeling when we pick them up and throw them in the water that, we're causing them to suffer. So we tend to put our thinking, our way of seeing things on other beings. This reminded me when we were watching Supergirl. Whenever there's an alien in the thing, that alien always comes to the planet without any emotions. But always by the end of the series, they're full of emotion. So we have placed that. I mean, we can make aliens look different, but we still endow them with the emotions that we have,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yes, and for this reason, when science says, okay, no, let us stop doing that and looks at matter, they still have the same bias, because they still are trying to, they say plants are not conscious because they don't show the kind of consciousness that we have. They only now they are accepting that animals are conscious, which is crazy. But really, objectively in science, there are some papers postulating animals also have consciousness. Of course, they are conscious and they can perceive the environment, but when they talk about consciousness, they are thinking about, a process of cognition or something closer to human beings. And it has taken a long time for science to begin to accept something that is so evident otherwise.
And remember, we talked about that consciousness, matter, and energy all go together. So this could be more universal, which it says, look at the universals, not the particulars, but that everything everything is conscious, everything has matter, and everything has an energy, but not as we see it here on the physical plane.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6. The universe is worked and guided from within outwards. As above, so it is below. as in heaven, so on the earth. And man, the microcosm and miniature copy of the macrocosm, is the living witness to this universal law and to the mode of its action. We see that every external motion, act, gesture, whether voluntary or mechanical, organic or mental, is produced and preceded by internal feeling or emotion, will or volition, and thought or mind. As no outward motion or change, when normal, in man's external body can take place unless provoked by an inward impulse given through one of the three functions, the volition, the thought, or the feeling, so with the external or manifested universe.
So basically, she's saying just as every external action we do comes from an inner motion, then the same happens with the universe. The rotation of the planets and the cosmic processes and the laws of nature, she says they are all the external manifestations of something internal.
Yeah, it's just so the universe comes from a divine thought, and that divine thought then manifests into what we see through a plan. And we'll see here that those hierarchy of beings are the ones that make that plan or work that plan so that we have what is manifested.
Mm-hmm. There is a little story of fish underwater seeing the bottom of a ship, and they see that the ship goes here and there, but because they cannot see what is on the ship, they have the impression that the ship is moving randomly, maybe driven by the water of the ocean. So in a certain sense, when we look only at the physical aspect, we are seeing the same. We are seeing only the mechanical aspect of it, and we don't know whether there is an intelligence behind driving all those motions or not. So science today, they are answer for how is this happening, why does this happen, where the intelligence comes from. The answer is normally it's all random, it's just chance, because science cannot perceive beyond the mechanical motions.
So if we look here too, as she's going to talk in the next few slides, that on every plane there is its own intelligence, there is its own force, there is its own material or matter, there is its own matter. But once again, it's not from our point of view that we have to create these beings or these aspects of each of the planes, but they have a specific one itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to be careful not to anthropomorphize them.
Right. The whole cosmos is guided, controlled, and animated almost endless by almost endless series of hierarchies of sentient beings, each having a mission to perform, and who, whether we give them one name or another, whether we call them Dion Chohans or angels, are messengers in the sense only that they are the agents of karmic and cosmic laws. They vary infinitely in their respective degrees of consciousness and intelligence. So this is what I was saying, that on each plane there are intelligent beings, there are forces, and there is matter that make up these planes. And so they're varying degrees of these depending on what plane. So the ones that are closer to the physical will have more matter, less spirit, and then some energy in there. And the ones that are higher will have more spirit, less matter.
Mm-hmm. And the idea here is that, as again, when we talk about the universe being guided by intelligent beings, when we say intelligent, we are not saying thinking entities, because the intelligence that we know is based on thinking, or entities that on a whim, for example, gravity or electricity or any of the forces of nature, as we are going to see, are expressions of intelligent beings. But this doesn't mean that these beings, one day one says, I'm going to go on a strike today, and there will be no gravity in the universe for today. There are different kinds of intelligences where things work in a different way. Like, I mentioned this in some other classes. Illnesses, they typically follow a same kind of behavior that is predictable, and those illnesses are mediated by intelligent beings, by the bacteria who have their own kind of intelligence. It's not a mechanical failure. In the past they had the miasma theory, which was that there was some mechanical failure when to explain an illness, and then they discover no, the illness is actually produced by living beings. But because the illness was so reproducible, or that you can reproduce, right. It happens in the same way in different people, they thought it was something mechanical.
And the other thing is the messengers. The first thing when I read this was that saying, don't shoot the messenger. And I thought, oh, that was just kind of, a random thought. But it really makes sense because they are just messengers. They are just agents. They're not the and I wanted to say like enactors. They're not the one who decide. They're not the judge, jury, and they don't come out. So all of these intelligence follow a law, follow something that is, just like you said about the illnesses, follow something that is innately in there and not just at the will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not whimsical.
Yes.
Their activities follow a law.
Right, and once again, we put things in our own personal nature. So there may be a law not to go when there's a stop sign. You have to stop at a stop sign. Well, that's only a law here if you get caught. So in the inner worlds, those laws are more exact.
Mm-hmm. So have these messengers gone through human evolution? That's next.
Ooh, we're getting there. The whole order of nature evinces a progressive march towards a higher life. There is design in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. The whole process of evolution with its endless adaptations is a proof of this. The immutable laws that weed out the weak and feeble species to make room for the strong, and which ensure the survival of the fittest, though so cruel in their immediate action, all are working towards the grand end. What is called unconscious nature is in reality an aggregate of forces, manipulated by semi-intelligent beings, the elementals, guided by high planetary spirits, the Dion Chohans, whose collective aggregate forms the manifested verbum of the unmanifested logos and constitutes at one and the same time the mind of the universe and its immutable law. The middle part here where she talks about the immutable laws that weed out the weak and feeble species to make room for the strong. If once again we anthropomorphize that, we don't like that at all, because there's some point in our life where we are weak and we want to make sure that we survive. So this is on an inner level. This is a different law than what is here, or what we make up here in the physical world.
Yes, and she's pointing out to something that is still even more emphasized today in science. From the scientific point of view, evolution doesn't have any purpose. Adaptations do not happen, not even to make the organism more perfect. Adaptations just happen from the scientific point of view in the sense of there are these random changes, and those changes that randomly happen and these changes are the result of mistakes in the reproduction of the DNA. So those changes that randomly just happen to be good for that environment will survive, and the other changes will die out. So the changes that happen in organism are not even an effort to perfect the organism or to adapt the organism better. The changes are random. So there is no purpose in evolution. It's not that organisms are somehow trying to be better. It's just mistakes that ended up being good. So Blavatsky here is addressing this and saying, well, the whole order of nature from the occult point of view is a progressive march towards higher life. And there is a purpose behind all these laws. And there are intelligences guiding all these laws.
And that in itself, when we understand that, then we can understand things here on the physical plane a little better, and that I would think would take away a little the anxiety of what seems like a chaotic, unfair, survival of the fittest world.
Mm-hmm. So here is a little diagram of what she was talking about. There is a universal mind that is the logos. And that universal mind is like the source of intelligence in the system. And that intelligence, again, the logos, don't think of the logos as a being separate from the rest. The logos is the quality of intelligence that exists throughout the solar system. When a cell is created, that cell comes with some intelligence intrinsic in the cells. That intelligence is the logos. Our intelligence is the logos. The logos is that intrinsic intelligence that whatever form manifests will express part of that intelligence. So the first entities, the highest entities that embody the intelligence of the logos are these Dion Chohans, these planetary spirits. And that intelligence then moves forces of nature, which are these elementals, and these forces of nature are the ones that are behind the laws of nature. So there is a chain of being, as it was called in the Western esotericism. There is a chain of being where from a wider intelligence, it manifests from a universal wide intelligence, it manifests in more and more concrete and individual ways.
And Ed asks, or Claridine says, agents of karmic and cosmic laws. I guess you're reiterating, unless you have a question there. Mm-hmm. And yes, so instead of being these messengers, they're the agents of. They're working for the karmic and cosmic laws. Mm-hmm. And then Ed asks, could the logos be like the programming language or states?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose if we take that analogy, the logos could be the basic language, and then all the different things that can be programmed are like the different entities, in the universe. So the logos is the basic programming language.
They are finite in all respects, these beings, mm-hmm. these Dion Chohans, mm-hmm. With the exception of their higher principles. The immortal sparks reflecting the universal divine flame, individualized and separated only on the spheres of illusion by a differentiation as elusive as the rest. They are living ones because they are the streams projected on the cosmic screen of illusion from the absolute life. It is the inner principle in them which belongs to the waters of immortality, while its differentiated clothing is as perishable as man's body. So here she talks about finite. So they are finite, but not their whole being. And these immortal sparks are the monad. So those are the parts that are not finite, that are immortal and will live on. They're individualized and separated, but only on the spheres of illusion, so only where there is individuality and separation.
They have perishable clothing, just as we do. So basically, she's addressing the question. Normally, when people think of angels or something like that, they think of them as pure spirits. And Blavatsky is saying, no, just like in the case of human beings, there is an eternal aspect of them, just as our monad, and the monad is nothing but the logos expressing through our bodies or through the bodies of of these celestial beings. And then there is the perishable aspect, that is, they are bodies. They have bodies, not of physical matter, they have bodies of the matter of whatever plane they belong to. And because this is matter, the bodies are also perishable. Normally matter on the inner planes last far longer than the physical matter. They can even last for the whole evolutionary cycle. So it's not necessarily that an angel will die and reincarnate, within a cycle. But philosophically speaking, they have these two aspects just as we do.
And I was going to say the analogy is, if we're at a movie theater, the light that is creating the images on the screen is the absolute. That will keep going. That will always be there. The images are what keeps changing.
Yeah, yeah. In this example, the way Blavatsky uses it, maybe we could say, the white light is the absolute. The colors within the white light would be the manifested
the forms.
And then the forms that we see on the screen, which are constantly changing, are the illusion. But the light itself is there, even though the forms and the colors change. The light is always there. So.
Each of these beings, the Dion Chohans, either was or prepares to become a man, if not in the present, then in the past or a coming cycle, which is a manvantara. From the highest archangel down to the last conscious, least, it's supposed to say least. I think it's supposed to say least conscious builder, the inferior class of spiritual entities. All such are men, having lived eons ago in other manvantaras, on this or other spheres, so the inferior, semi-intelligent, and non-intelligent elementals are all future men. The fact alone that a spirit is endowed with intelligence is a proof to that occultist that such a being must have been a man and acquired his knowledge and intelligence throughout the human cycle. So here she starts with the one category of the Dion Chohans, the ones that were men, that will become, that were men, became perfected adepts, perfected men, which are adepts, and then became the Dion Chohans.
Mm-hmm. So remember we mentioned briefly that there are some elemental kingdoms before becoming or entering the evolution of minerals, and then plants, and then animals and human beings. So there is a whole diversity of pre-human spiritual entities that they are semi-intelligent, as Blavatsky keeps saying, and these are going to become, in some evolutionary cycle, eventually a human being. And then there are others, all these Dion Chohans and builders, as Michele just said, that they were human beings, they perfected, finished the human evolution, and then the evolution proceeds as a celestial being.
In their higher, less material spheres, they differ morally from terrestrial human beings only in that they are devoid of the feeling of personality and of human emotional nature, two purely earthly characteristics. So that's one thing that we go back to, that we have to remember, that the personality and the emotional nature are of the lower nature, or the physical, the terrestrial, the earthly nature, and are not on any of the other planes. So for us to think that way, that there are emotions in that sense, is erroneous thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they have their own expressions of consciousness, because we may think, so what, if you don't have emotions or you don't have thoughts, then how can you be conscious? Well, there are infinite forms of expression of consciousness. Again, we tend to think that consciousness is reduced to the kind of human activities.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. So Blavatsky here basically says that the celestial beings don't have personality or an emotional nature, and she will go on a little bit more.
Right, they don't have that I am myself or I am a person. That is just not within their nature.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see a little more of this.
The perfected humans, the perfected humans have become free from these feelings because A, they have no longer fleshy bodies, an ever-numbing weight on the soul, and B, the pure spiritual element being left untrammeled and more free, they are less influenced by Maya, or this illusion, than man can ever be. Unless he is an adept who keeps his two personalities, the spiritual and the physical, entirely separated. Go ahead.
Yeah, so here she first looks at why the angels or the Dion Chohans, who are perfected men in the sense that they went through the human kingdom and they perfected that and they moved on to a celestial kingdom. They don't have a sense of personality and human emotions for these two reasons. They don't have bodies which are like the body or physical bodies, fleshly, she says, which are like a veil to the soul, that the soul keeps getting confused thinking I am the body. So they don't have that veils the soul. And also their spiritual nature is freer. Not because it was given to them. They already went through what we are going through now, and they have learned and transcended this state. So their spiritual nature is has woken up and is active and free to exercise all the powers that are intrinsic in the spiritual nature, something that doesn't happen with us except with the adepts. The adepts are like this transitional state. They are still humans, but they learn how to leave the human nature behind, and they can operate as celestial beings.
So they've reached the consciousness of the celestial beings. They're on the same plane there, but they've kept their body. And this is where in Buddhism you have the bodhisattva. So this is what could be called like the suffering, I lost the word. Sorry. But where...
Dukkha, you mean?
No. Where they give up. Give up life on the inner planes.
Renunciation.
Thank you. The renunciation, where they have reached that higher life, that ability to be on the inner planes, but they give that up, and for us to stay here with the physical body. And with that comes, now they're able to separate it. For us in our physical nature is like it's the example where if our hand is our divine spark, and as we come down into matter, we end up in a boxing glove. We forget that there's a hand there with 5 fingers.
Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of questions there.
So God doesn't have temper tantrums.
Yes,
That's what Ed says.
Yes, not according to this.
Nobody has temper tantrums except us physical human beings. The animals don't have temper tantrums. The plants don't have temper tantrums. The rocks don't. And then the devas or the Dion Chohans don't have temper tantrums. So those are unique to the human nature.
Mm-hmm. And then they were asked, what about love or compassion? And well, again, what we call love or compassion expresses in different ways on different levels. We have an experience of love and compassion as feelings, as emotions, because we have an emotional body. And the expression of love and compassion as an emotion is perfectly, good for a human being, but it's still a limitation to what love or compassion really is. So when the limitations of a human being are transcended, love and compassion expressed in a completely different way that we cannot really imagine, but basically, why we could say that one of the reasons why all these celestial beings that are behind the laws of the universe cannot be whimsical and say, oh, today I don't feel like working, or is because they operate only as an expression of love and compassion. So there is nothing but love and compassion. So there are no clashing emotions that they have to choose for one or the other.
So once we get past the physical nature, we come into the higher order of things, and all virtues are higher order. So they come from the higher inner planes and are expressed unselfishly on those higher planes. So they don't. So like you said, anything that a Deva does or a Dion Chohan does comes from love and compassion, because that's the plane where they work from.
And for example, a teenager will have a concept of what love is, and a mother will have a different concept of what love is in regards to the child, for example. And a teenager would, well, we grow up with our parents, so we know about that kind of love. But at the level of the experience of a teenager, the expression of love that a father or a mother may have may be completely foreign for the teenager, and that the teenager would not even call that love, because for him love is a romantic kind of love. So in a similar way, celestial beings don't have any kind of love in the way that we experience it, and for all we know, we wouldn't call that love, but on that level it is the way that love expresses.
The incipient monads, having never yet had terrestrial bodies, can have no sense of personality or egoism. That which is meant by personality being a limitation, the term cannot, of course, be applied to non-human entities. So here she's talking about the other side. We had the side of the Dion Chohans that went through the kingdoms of nature on up to an adept, and now our Dion Chohans. And then we have the other side, which Leadbeater and Besson called devas. They call them a category of devas. They have not yet been humans.
Yes, some of the, again, devas is a very general sense.
Yeah.
Some of the devas are unconscious. Blavatsky also refers to the passive angels or passive devas as being those spiritual entities that have not yet gone through the human kingdom and developed first free will with all the mistakes that come from free will, and then a universal will. So this, as Michele says, these incipient monads are the spiritual entities that are pre-human, including the elementals, nature spirits, etc.
So in the story of the prodigal son, these incipient monads are the son that stayed home. And the other category are the sons that went out, saw what it was like, and returned home. None of these beings, high or low, have either individuality or personality as separate entities. That is, they have no individuality in the sense in which a man says, I am myself and no one else. In other words, they are conscious of no such distinct separateness as man and things have on earth. Individuality is a characteristic of their respective hierarchies, not of their units, and these characteristics vary only with the degree of the plane to which those hierarchies belong. The nearer to the region of homogeneity and the one divine, the pure and less accentuated is the individuality in the hierarchy. So this is kind of what we talked about before, that everything is made up of spirit, matter, and consciousness. Those that are closer to the physical plane have more matter and less spirit. Oh, I said that wrong. Spirit, matter, and energy. Yes, or consciousness, matter, and energy. So those that are closest to the physical plane have more matter, less spirit. Those that are higher to the absolute have more spirit and less matter.
Yes, and the idea of the sense of I-ness, in a human being there is the sense of I am this body, and this body is obviously separate and different from the next body, so I am this and not anything else. But as evolution proceeds, that sense of I-ness becomes wider and wider. So again, we have to keep remind ourselves that we cannot really understand what the sense of I-ness is that encompasses the whole hierarchy. Some allegories or its metaphors can be given so that we have a certain sense.
I have the one on the team. Were
Yeah,
you going to
yeah,
say
no,
that?
no, yeah.
The team, if you have, or you talk to any coach, if you have a team and a very successful team, it's usually because as a whole, they work as a whole. So you might take somebody who is the best at scoring points, but you need him back where to defend the goal. And if that person's willing to take that, and we all know defenders never get any of the spotlight, if he's willing to go back there, or she's willing to go back there and do that role, then you have a team that's working as one. Or the example of an orchestra. An orchestra is all these individual instruments, but when they play as one.
Mm-hmm. So in both examples, a good team or a good orchestra is that one in which the individuals are not thinking about what they would like to do, whether they would like to, to shine, or they are trying to see what does the team need me to do. So their whole thinking is in terms of the team, not in terms of themselves. And same with the orchestra. So that can be an allegory to the sense of individuality of the celestial beings. They are far beyond the idea of, oh, I would like to take a nap, I would like to do this. Their only concern is what they as a hierarchy have to do. So I think that's part of how we can look at this.
They are neither ministering nor protecting angels, still less the messengers of wrath of any god such as man's fancy has created. To appeal to their protection is as foolish as to believe that their sympathy may be secured by any kind of propitiation, for they are, as much as man himself is, the slaves and creatures of immutable karmic and cosmic law. The reason for this is evident. Having no elements of personality in their essence, they can have no personal qualities such as are attributed by men in exoteric religions to their anthropomorphic God. So this again, we have to remember that by the very nature of the human kingdom, we have those lower qualities within us that need to be realized, purified, and transcended in order for us to think outside of the mutable laws that we deal with every day.
Mm-hmm. So there is a question, what about healing angels? And that's a good question to talk about what this means. So this doesn't mean that angels don't have any kind of relationship with human beings or with the other kingdoms of nature. This doesn't mean that there cannot be a cooperation between human beings and angels, etc., etc. What it means is that angels will do first whatever is their functions to do. There are healing angels that when the conditions are appropriate, they will participate in a healing meditation, for example, because this is what they do, and also because the conditions are appropriate. For example, if the healing angels will not come if the activity there is selfish, to get some personal benefit. Also, angels, even healing angels, will not go against karma. If the karma of the person is to die, the healing angels are not going to perform a miracle just because they like the son of this poor mother and he's so cute and he has asta, so let us do a miracle and heal it. Blavatsky, what is she saying there is they don't act in that way. They act within karma. We can all cooperate together, but what will happen within the law, and also always looking at the greater good. So angels cannot really be commanded by personal sacrifices, prayers, propitiations. I mean, people can pray if that, that the prayer is necessary for the person that prays, not for the divine powers. When a person prays, there is, an attunement of consciousness and some psychological effects. But basically the angels, and sometimes there are stories of angels that protected a child in an accident. But that happened because that child did not have, he didn't or she didn't have to die there. So the means to save a child is by means of the angels, for example. But they won't come and save a child because the mother is praying for that. If that was, if dying, for example, to take extreme examples, was part of what that soul needed to experience.
Well, we can see in any tragic incident that there are people that walk away unscathed. There are people that lose, limb, and there are people that lose their life in there. So, and that's always a question about why did that happen. But if we really can go back to this and remember that life per se is a slave and a creature of an immutable karmic and cosmic law, then we can understand it a little better. However, being in the human body with our thoughts, our emotions, and our sensations, it's still not going to make it feel any better.
Yes, we, especially in the West, well, I suppose everywhere, we grow up with this sense of having an external agency that we can pray and get some free,
Right.
boons. And Blavatsky is saying it doesn't work in that way. It may be disappointing. Now, there are entities that can be commanded. There are entities that can be bribed, because many times we take prayer or sacrifices as a bribe, a way to get God or angels to help us. So there are entities that will do that. Those are the elementals. Elementals are the semi-intelligent forces that we talked about. And sacrifices or prayers or things, especially when because elementals are moving in the direction of acquiring a personality, they are attracted by selfishness and by self-serving acts and all this. So we can manipulate. That's how magic works. That's how the different rituals with a selfish intent work. We can attract elementals and use them to produce things or to bring us things, but then we pay the karmic price for that. All of that is very dangerous, and ultimately speaking, it's not worth doing it.
And that's what Madame Blavatsky did in the early days of the Theosophical Society. She was able to command these elementals to produce things. But if you look at it, it took a toll on her body, and her life. She was dead by 60.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, adepts and occultists, they know how to move the elementals, but you have to pay the karmic price. In the case of Blavatsky, she was doing that not to get money or to get this or that, was to help in the evolution of humanity, as a sacrifice, but nevertheless she had to pay the price. This is how it works.
Right. So even with good intent, you still have to pay the price. So that's an immutable law.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there is a reward, spiritually speaking, for those who look at things in terms of reward and punishment. But nevertheless, on the physical level, you have to pay.
Yeah, the personality never gets part of that reward.
Okay, and I think this is the last one, or we are finishing.
No, this is the last one. Man, being a compound of the essences of all these celestial hierarchies, may succeed in making himself, as such, superior in one sense to any hierarchy or class, or even combination of them. Man can neither propitiate nor command the devas, it is said, but by paralyzing his lower nature and arriving thereby at the full knowledge of the non-separateness of his higher self from the one absolute self, man can, even during his terrestrial life, become as one of us. Thus it is by eating the fruit of knowledge, which dispels ignorance, that man becomes like one of the Elohim, or the Dhyanis, and once on their plane, the spirit of solidarity and perfect harmony which reigns in every hierarchy must extend over him and protect him in every particular. So the higher order of things, or these angels, do not come down to the terrestrial life. But if we can realize, purify, transcend our lower nature, we can rise up and meet them on the higher or inner planes.
Yeah, so basically what H.P.B. Is saying here is that even though we cannot ask for protection from the angels or command them to so that they do this or that for us, there is a way in which we can gain their protection, let's say. And that way, as she says there, is by, as Michele was saying, raising our consciousness to their level in the sense of realizing our spiritual nature, which on the spiritual plane is the same spiritual nature of the angels, and acting as a channel for that spiritual nature while in the body. And then it is said in all spiritual traditions that when a person lives an angelic life, let's call it, a life that is doing the same as the angels are doing, a life that is looking for the greater good, that is trying to help evolution proceed forward, then that person becomes like part of the angels, and then the angels protect that person from any non-karmic accident or problem. You know, karma is not a rigid law, mechanical. It's very flexible. There are many things that may happen to a person that was not the personal karma of that person. And then if the person suffers something that it was not produced by him or her in a previous life, that person will be rewarded, in a future life with something that he or she didn't really deserve but balances out. Now, for people who are working for humanity or for the greater good, it is said in different traditions, they have angels that keep an eye on them so that their lives are not cut short or unnecessarily made difficult by accidents. But not by the karmic causes. Karmic causes, they have to happen, and neither angel nor God will interfere in that. But living an angelic life, one becomes part of the angels, allegorically speaking, and becomes part of the protection of the angels.
Once again, our physical nature might not realize this protection or even think that there's protection out there, for us, because we don't know what we're being protected from a lot of the time if we're doing work as the angels would do it. And then I thought it was really important to remember that we're not raising our consciousness to something that's not already with us. In the example of the boxing glove, if we can get command of our lower nature, that boxing glove comes off and we might just have on a winter mitten. And in a winter mitten, you can feel more of the fingers and your hands, and thereby then touch a little more of our divine
nature. And then if you keep taking all the gloves off, eventually you get to your hand, which was always with you.
Right.
That's what you are saying, that it's nothing new. So raising the consciousness is actually realizing what we are without all these other veils around.
That's it.
All right, so that's it for today. Are there any other comments, questions? I see Deborah is typing. So this all this aspect of the angels is, as we were saying at the beginning, it's a new point that she introduces in what we have been seeing so far, and it's an important aspect of the whole Secret Doctrine, because the idea in the Secret Doctrine is that all these different intelligences are actually behind everything we see. But we need to understand that they are not there like human beings manipulating life. Their very essence expresses itself on the physical plane in certain actions or laws. This is something that requires study and meditation.
So,
Anything else
yeah,
before we close?
Next week we are at 5. It's the
Yeah.
4th week, and we are studying the laundry list, 5
Yeah,
proven, nope,
5 proven
proven
facts.
facts, 5
Yeah.
proven
Which
facts.
again is not really a subtitle. Blavatsky
Yeah.
says, let us now recapitulate these 5 proven facts.
Right. That's
And
not in
how
the
we-
table of contents.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so.
All right. Okay, so thank you everybody for your participation and for being here. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.